Hello and welcome to our August Spotlight webinar with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry expert, Graham Brooks, here to give us an inside look into automation processes, showing you how to use intuitive workflows to manage effectively and efficiently. And with that, Graham Brooks.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get right down to business. Today's session is going to be around IT automation. So we're not interested in patching. We're not interested in vulnerability remediation, though those are great things to care about, and those are things that we can do. We have plenty of sessions we've done over the past couple months on those subjects. Today, I'm going to walk through some of the other options you have with our platform, how to build a process to control a service and access to resources, or perhaps a tool to install particular software into an environment. Right now, we're looking at the console home screen, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of background about our platform architecturally before we get into the fun stuff. So just be aware, we're a cloud-hosted platform. We live in Azure, and we are an agent-based solution. So you'd install Syxsense on the devices that you intend to manage. And once that is done, we can start doing our work. In my environment, I've got a lot of different kinds of assets. I've got some Linux devices, Mac devices, Windows endpoints. We can manage all those different types of assets. Kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but generically, we're going to be able to send commands down to those devices and inform them of work that we need them to do. Okay, so that's architecture. What does it actually look like to streamline, simplify your IT automation process? How do we do that with our platform? We're going to go over to Cortex. It's our automation tool set, and we're going to build a really simple workflow. And then we're going to kind of show you how I could deploy it. And we're even going to go into a live demo of the process. So let's say that you have a set of softwares that you need to install on all of your devices. We can do that through the tool set without you having to do any sort of manual provisioning. All I'm going to do is go over to my pre-built software list, and I'm going to drag over from our software store an action. First thing I'm going to have it install is something basic like Google Chrome. So Chrome, we want that installed by default. And I'm just going to notate this and tell it that we're doing Google Chrome. Then we're going to do another install. So I'm going to drag over that same software store action, and I am going to grab Microsoft Teams. And now we have a relationship here. We've got Google Chrome. If the installation is successful, great. We'll go and install Teams. And this is really all there is to it. It's super simple to deploy. You just drag and drop the actions that you want us to run for you. Now, if I have other packages, more complex items that I need to manage, I do have the ability to package my own content. I'm going to use CrowdStrike next as my example. So I'm going to drag over the Falcon endpoint sensor here and just make a statement that says, hey, this is a really specific software that we've crafted for our environment. So we need to deploy that. You'll note there are fewer options here because those options would be baked into the installation mechanism that we build. All right, so there's some software for you. That didn't take much time at all. We've been here for what, maybe 30 seconds, and we've already built out installations for Chrome, for Teams, and for Falcon endpoint. What if there are other things we need to care about too? Like maybe BitLocker is something you need to provision in your environment. Well, I just need to enable some advanced actions here, and we'll target BitLocker and we'll just tell it to enforce it. So in our search bar in the upper left, we're going to look for BitLocker and we're going to check and see if it's enabled. So I'm just going to drag over my BitLocker check. We're going to look for OS volume. Once we've checked it, if it isn't enabled, we will deploy BitLocker on this device, and we'll use the C drive because that's the default. I'm going to tell it to wait until encryption ends to respond positively for this action. And we're going to do a PIN and TPM. I'm going to put in a passphrase here. Keep it really stupid simple, but that's the process. Now we can add other things in here. We can have branching paths if we want. So I'm going to throw in an action for our firewall. So I'm going to say, hey, if we don't have an active firewall, let's enforce it. So dragging over firewall status, we're going to check if the firewall is enabled. And if it is, great. And if it's not, we're then going to enable the firewall on this device. And then if I wanted to get even more crazy, I could add other actions to this process. I could have it checked to see if we have particular rules for the firewall enabled, and if they're not, deploy them. So we haven't spent much time yet, right? This wasn't that much effort. We already have a branching path that describes different kinds of work that need to happen in our environment. And it's fully functioning. If I were to deploy this, you'd see it work, and we'll do that in just a minute. But the amount of effort required to craft this is pretty minimal. That's what we're trying to help you see, is that you can build automation without having to run to VS Code and spend hours debugging what you've built with PowerShell or Bash or Python. Instead, you can just drag and drop individual actions from our sidebar. We've done all of the logic behind the scenes that you don't have to. You just get to make the decision tree about what happens in what order. Though, if you want, you are welcome to include scripts. So I'll show you a brief example of what that would look like. So I'm going to go and search for PowerShell. I'm just going to say, hey, execute PowerShell as part of this process if we need to. Here, we can have it write whatever we want. Maybe this is a domain joining action that connects you to Azure AD. Maybe you're mounting network drives, though we could mount them for you just with an action we have pre-built. But here, I'm just going to leave it on the default. And so now I have a PowerShell script embedded in this process. So if you have existing code, if you have a process, you are welcome to use that existing process in Syxsense. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's really all there is to know. At this point, we're just going to start riffing on some of the functionality so you can see what it looks like. To do this, I'm going to jump over to another Syxsense console, and we're going to look at a particular device because I want to understand this environment. So I'm scrolling down and I'm looking for this endpoint specifically. And what I want to show you is what it would look like to create an enforcement policy on an endpoint. It's going to be a little bit basic, but what I'm going to describe is if there's a service that's not running, we're going to enforce a policy on the device, and the policy is going to restrict their access to resources. So here, I first want to be able to actually see this device. So we're going to open a remote session to the endpoint so I can actually look at the end user's computer screen. And then from there, I'm going to open up my command line so that we have access to the command center. Then I'm going to go back to my device here in the console, and I'm going to go over to Cortex. Because what I want to do is show you what it looks like to run something. So here, we're going to look for my spooler stopper. So the example here is you have a service, and we want to make sure that it's running. And if it's not running, we're going to force the firewall into compliance and enforce a rule. The idea being maybe if you've got a antivirus platform or a SIM tool or a backup tool, if those platforms are not actively running, we need to take some sort of enforcement action. This is a pretty simple example. We're just looking to see if the print spooler is running. If it is, no actions taken. If it's not, we then enforce a bunch of rules on the device. So that's the idea. We're going to go back over to the device real fast, and we're actually going to look for our services, and we're going to just briefly disable this print spooler. So here, let's see if I can find my spooler. And if I can't, I can always actually turn it off from within our other platform in Syxsense. Let's try in here. So come up if I go spooler. There we go. All right. So I'm going to just for the moment stop the print spooler. And then back here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell this workflow to run now. I'm going to select my device from my target list, and we're just going to choose the endpoint that we're currently remoted into. And what I've done is I've created a simple firewall rule. This firewall rule is going to look to see if the 1.1.1.1 DNS server is accessible. And if it is, it'll block access. So that's all we're doing there. So here we can already see that the workflow is completed. We've checked to see if the service is running. It's currently stopped. So we've then done a firewall check. Is there a firewall enabled? Yes, there is. Okay, we made sure it was enabled. Yes, it is. Awesome. We then enforced a firewall rule on that device. If I go back into this endpoint and go ping and then put in the address, let's try that again. There we go. We should see a general failure because we have that rule in place. Now, if I go back and change the enforcement, so either change the routing of this workflow, or if I just simply turn print spooler back on, you'll see a drastically different use case. So here, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to go to my print spooler, and I'm going to tell it to turn back on. So spooler, you should be running. Then in here, I'm going to run the same workflow again on the exact same device, and we should see a different path show up. So check to see if the service is running, and then after we evaluate that, turn off the firewall rule that we set. And it might take a moment for it to check in. Our devices have up to about 30 seconds before they're for sure going to run a workflow, but generally it happens pretty much in real time. All right, so it's finished. We have our service status. It's set to running right now. And the outcome is we changed that firewall rule. If I go back in here and we look at our ping, we should see that it responds because that rule is no longer in place. Now that's a really simple example, but I can make this so much more complex, more effective if I just change a few concepts. So this is set to run once. That's not very useful for monitoring and managing an automated IT process. So what I could do instead is set this to run on an interval. And I can change that to run every, let's say, 10 seconds on my device. And now I can have a policy that will simply look to this endpoint and evaluate it on an ongoing basis. And depending on the status of the firewall and the status of the print spooler, it'll either allow them or disallow them access to their IP. So here, if I just check it again, it should still work because we have a print spooler enabled. And then all I need to do is stop the spooler, and then this will stop working in about 10 seconds because that's the interval that I've given it. So if I just give it a few more seconds, we should see that change take place. There you go, general failure. So that's how the IT automation engine works with Syxsense. It's all about making simple workflows, creating policies, and then seeing those policies enforced in real time. It's really that simple. You don't need to spend a lot of time building effective compliance. You should have a tool set that does it for you. And then you get to use your existing IT experience and knowledge to craft whatever compliance you need through the tool set. You shouldn't have to do any of this manually. Okay, there's one last layer though that I want to look at here. This doesn't actually complete the loop, because what if we have that firewall rule and we can't access resources because the service is broken? Well, we want to actually heal the environment. We want it to work as intended. So what I can do is I can actually add an extra step in there that's going to fix the problem. I'm going to first delete the policy that I created, and then we're going to go in and we're going to fix it. So here, if I scroll down to that spooler stopper, we're actually going to edit it ever so slightly. And we are then going to add a service check that's going to start the service back up again. So here, we're going to look for service, and we're going to tell it to start services. And we're going to start spooler. And what you're going to see is that once we have started the spooler, it's going to then just heal itself because we start it. And then once it's started, the next time we go through the interval, it'll see that it's running and it will turn off that firewall rule. So hit save again. And then we're going to publish the policy to our devices. We're going to keep it on that every 30-second or 10-second interval, I think is what I set. And then we should be good to go. All right, I need to set my devices again real fast. Bear with me a second. I'm going to go down, choose that endpoint, hit save, and then save again. All right, so now we have a process in place that's going to evaluate on an ongoing basis, and we can actually see that on the endpoint side. So right now, our service should be running. That's what I expect it to be. I am going to stop the print spooler. And then if we give it about 10 or 15 seconds, it should start working after we deny access for a period of time. See, there you go. We just denied access to the resource because the print spooler was not running. And then now we are giving you access again. And that's how fast it is. I chose 10 seconds because it's easy. You could narrow that down to like 2 or 3 seconds if you wanted to. And so if you had a more severe situation, like your antivirus platform wasn't working, you could create that policy that says, hey, block access to the corporate network. Don't let them connect to the corporate VPN because we're seeing this issue with AV. And then maybe reinstall the antivirus platform for them and give them access again after you've done that. It's pretty much infinite what you can accomplish with the tool set. It's just down to your own decision-making process. And it scales amazingly well. Let me show you just one final example within server management. We have here a remediation for Log4j on a server environment. It's a lot more complex than the workflows we've been looking at because it's doing a lot more. In this case, what we're doing is we're opening a ticket stating that we're evaluating a device for Log4j vulnerabilities. We're taking a snapshot of a VM. We are removing that VM from the load balancer queue, making calls to AWS and the Elastic Load Balancer. Then we are turning services off. We're rebooting the host in a pre-check context. We're then updating our ticket. We're deploying remediations against the vulnerabilities, patching Apache to bring it up to date so it no longer has the old binary for Log4j. We're reevaluating for the same vulnerabilities, making sure that the device is now healthy. We update the ticket as we go. We validate that Apache is running correctly. We then go talk to Elastic Load Balancer again, add the host back to the queue, close out the ticket, create a new virtual machine snapshot or EC2 snapshot. It can be very complex if you need it to, but it's also self-documenting because you can see every step along the way. And as you just saw earlier, we can easily change, modify, improve the process to do whatever kind of work you need. So that's all I had to cover today. If you have any questions around the content, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Syxsense rep who got you interested in this session. And just feel free to send us an email. We'd love to set up a time to talk to you in more depth about how you can use Syxsense to streamline your IT automation process. Thank you.